Hello and welcome to What So What Now What. Today is the 19th of April 2018 and I'm joined by my co-host Ravi.
Hello, good evening. How are you doing?
Good. This is episode number 4 and I'm just looking at my show notes here. I actually originally wrote in our show notes the 26th of March.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. This one, I think this one's been sort of kicked down the road by a couple of different things happening. But I
Yeah,
mean, conversely, we've had better weather since our last podcast. I think we were in the
much better
midst of
weather.
the beast from the east, and today is the hottest day of the year so far. I think
Yes, exactly.
I could smell barbecues when I went out to my butt garden this evening. So people are definitely making the most of the sun while they can.
That is the most British thing to do. As soon as there's any hint of sunshine, it's like, yeah,
Yeah,
barbecue.
yeah. It's like we need to like barbecue really hard right now, and also get our shorts out. So
Yeah, let's burn the hell out of our food and drown in smoke. Anyway, um, so today's episode is about AR and VR, right?
yeah, so augmented reality and virtual reality, and sort of what that means for the world today and where it's going. But I think we should start actually by linking back to our previous podcast. So we
Yes.
spoke about data and privacy, right? And then
Yeah.
almost as if by fate, the week after that was where we had the Facebook row, right? So this
Yes.
is,
Yes.
of course, many of you must know about this by now. The Cambridge Analytica scandal, where this company was using a personality app in order to gain user information and then use that for political targeted ads. Now, I feel like this links back to something we talked about a lot in the middle of the podcast, at least in the so what part previously, which is the whole talking about how Facebook doesn't listen to you or whatever. I
Hmm.
think this is almost pinpointed when when the story first broke and everyone was saying Facebook are floundering. Is it the actual reasoning they were floundering was they didn't want the headline to be a data breach because
Yes. Yeah.
it wasn't a breach. I mean, they were just giving it away,
Yeah.
which I think is an even worse position to be in. And yeah, it was just there's a great podcast I think we both listened called Exponent,
Yeah.
and the episode they did about Facebook after the story broke was fantastic because they talk about how Facebook's fundamental problem is it was trying to be a platform, and ultimately it just was not making the most because you got targeted advertising on Facebook anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So,
so
like,
they just weren't making any connections there. They're just giving the data away, and that was the meat of what their brand should be.
pretty much, the biggest thing that actually really frustrated me is the kind of I'm going to say ignorance by of the reporting
Hmm.
of the story. The journalism was fine. The journalism was factual, and I think the fact they found and they were able to prove that Cambridge Analytica was doing this was good.
Hmm.
What I didn't like and what I think was misleading to the public was to suggest that they were the only company to have gotten away with it.
Hmm.
No one seems to recall that the Barack Obama campaign was very, very proud of the fact that it was able to do this years before
Absolutely, absolutely.
Trump and Analytica were doing this. And this is funny because I think people just forgot how Facebook used to work. We all used to just hit OK when Facebook used to tell us when you click OK, we're going to share your friends' profiles and your profile with this company. This is
Yeah.
I even remember the interface for this thing. I just could not understand why this shocked so many people. And the funny thing is, Facebook is now using this to their gain because as soon as this announcement came out, they obviously had to, they looked like they were, sort of backed into a corner, but actually
Hmm.
they started closing off APIs to developers who had previously been able to access quite powerful features for Facebook to build their own platforms. Now you can't get your data out of the platform. You can't share certain bits of information with other apps. A good example is Tinder, for example. The day that this
Okay.
happened, 2 days later, the Tinder app stopped working because the API restrictions had been shut down and the app can function properly. So here's a really good example now where Facebook is now starting to draw a walled garden around its data. And this is kind of the big problem you see with people like Apple, where it's just so hard to get out of their ecosystem. And so what ends up happening is you get trapped, and you literally have no choice. You can't sort of move out of the system. So I don't know. I just think. I think it was misleading to suggest that Facebook and that Cambridge Analytica was the only example of this happening. It happened with pretty much any app or any company that
Hmm.
was doing this prior to the change that Facebook made from becoming a platform to becoming an advertising setup.
Yeah. And the targeted ads on Facebook, that's their bread and butter. That's their money machine, right? Like the
Hmm.
fact that you can say, I want to be advertising to people of this age with this profile who have friends like this to target that person. For example, there's always these fantastic articles where people do experiments on Facebook. Like they'll like every single page they see when they're scrolling their feed, and then they'll just see what happens to their news feed when they start liking just a random cacophony of stuff. Now, I completely agree with you. The journalism around it, as a pure journalistic point, like the undercover approach to it, the manner of reporting, the sort of structured way, that's a throwback to proper journalism, right? The effort and energy put into this to show this big expose. Now, I think where I agree with you is the literacy. I wouldn't say it's what's the word? Well, the word you use, but I'd say yeah, I don't think it's misleading. I think it's just they just don't know better, and this is where
isn't that the job? Isn't that their role? Surely you don't say to a data analyst that it's, it's part of a data analyst's job to sort of analyze the numbers and give a full picture of what's going on. Okay, journalists aren't data analysts, but
yeah,
it's a comparison.
But Tim, we get to the old adage of typing pools are analysts, right? So the similarity there is right now in the modern day you wouldn't expect someone to write an email for you, but in the 60s and 70s that was the norm. You had typing pools or people who wrote letters for you. But similarly, the analyst will become in this role where everyone would just be analyzing data, but we're not there yet. And I think that's where we are right now, which is people need that role, and that jump doesn't exist for people just to have that basic literacy. And that's definitely, I mean, the stories coming out about the hearing with Zuckerberg, with the Senate Council, and the questions that the elected officials were asking were so almost it came across as naive to a lot of the tech world. And but if we're thinking these are people who have access to an army of smart people who can brief them, imagine the average Joe in the world and the sort of approach they have on all of this. This is why things like hashtag delete Facebook comes, and people just do it because the fear creeps in.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I just think a simple question wasn't asked, and it wasn't asked because people wanted a scapegoat for the US elections. And the simple question was this: did any other company do the same thing? No one asked that question. And if you'd asked that question, marketing agencies would have popped up, the Obama campaign would have popped up, and then suddenly you would have actually been onto a much bigger story, which is the fact that how long did Facebook give so many developers information about us, and how much do they actually understand about where that data is today? Yeah.
Exactly, and at what point how can Facebook police that? Like if I've been sitting here getting millions and millions of users' data and social profiles that I now have in a database sitting on my server at home, how can Facebook then say, hey, did you delete that stuff? Oh yeah, definitely. They can't go to everyone's house. They can't find all of their app developers and say, go delete this data.
And therein lies I think the real story, because some of that data included things like sexual preferences, which in some countries is actually criminalized, and so it's actually dangerous data to be out there. And so, I just think there was a missed opportunity for a proper discussion, and we all got carried away with the easy headline, which is delete Facebook. And like, seriously, how many people deleted WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook? None of them. No one deleted all three apps from their phone, because Facebook owns all of those, and that's how much we're attached to that. But we must really start talking about AR. In fact, a really good segue.
I mean, exactly. I was going to say the segue here is perfect, which is Facebook buying Oculus Rift.
Oculus Rift, exactly. And Facebook have a really big interest in augmented reality. I sort of think augmented reality, virtual reality. There's a big difference. So let's just actually break that down first. AR and VR. So AR, how would you describe that?
So I sort of see augmented reality is I mean, it broke into the world and on a massive scale with Pokemon Go, right? Pokemon Go was the first real app that came out and was this application which everyone started using, and that is augmented reality. It was where you're using a device to augment the reality around you. In this case, find Pokemon in a location close to you and catch them, and you can have your camera on and flick a Pokeball at it. And it was just like, and based on where you are and the sort of environment you're in, different Pokemon will appear. So, for example, if you're in a city, you're more likely to see a Rattata, a rat-based Pokemon, or if you're in the countryside, you'll find the leaf ones. So I'd say augmented reality is something where you're using a device to augment and sort of change the way you interact with the world around you.
Yeah, you're sort of overlaying information over the real world, right? So that's sort of you're sort of adding information, augmenting, as it were. Whereas VR, in contrast, is actually about getting rid of the world around you and going into an environment that's virtual. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it's taking these. I feel like VR is more sensual, so it's relying on your oral and visual, oral with the AU in this case.
Yeah.
Senses to immerse yourself into another world or another environment. Whereas VR is you're still using your senses in a normal way, but you're using a device instead of your personal senses to do that.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. And so it tends to be more immersive, and it probably has better applications because the virtual world obviously can operate in a different paradigm, and so you tend to be able to be more creative with VR sort of
mhm,
instances. However, they take a lot more work in terms of the computational power that's required. So I'd say that's the other key difference. AR today can run on your phone. VR claims to be able to run on your phone, but they tend to get very hot, and the really compelling sort of VR applications tend to be run on very dedicated device. So I'm thinking of devices like the Oculus Rift, the
mhm.
HTC Vive.
Yes.
Those are sort of dedicated VR devices. Whereas for AR,
Mhm.
you have something as simple as your phone, which can do this.
Yeah.
It uses the screen to do the augmentation, or you can get something like the Microsoft Hololens, which you put on your face and it augments a much broader scope of your vision. So it has the ability to cover more of sort of visual scope. And so just to very briefly touch on this, I think AR, in terms of its history, was kind of the first thing that really sort of came into light in the mainstream when the iPhone 4 or the iPhone 4S added an accelerometer onto the device. And so what that
Right.
allowed the device to do is to be able to judge orientation and basically know which way it was facing, north, south, up or down, left and right.
Mhm.
And so if you knew your location, you knew which way you were looking, you could essentially augment locations in the real world. So a typical use case was, mapping. So you could sort of point your phone out to the skyline and you could see where, London was or where Big Ben was supposed to be. And that kind of technology was fairly rudimentary. I think those apps never caught on, but they
Yeah.
struck true to form.
Yeah. Now you mention it, I think I had a Nokia. So before I joined the iPhone crowd in 2015, I had a couple of Nokias, and my Nokia. I'm trying to think which one it was. It might have been the Windows one, which basically, if I went into a city, it was exactly that. The 3D mapping would appear. I'd be able to hold it up, and it would show me the different buildings around me.
Hmm.
Okay, and like which way to Big Ben or which way to the Shard and things like this.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's true. It's been around for a while, but again, it didn't really for me. I didn't really clock onto the idea and the concept of it until stuff like Pokemon Go, and then you start seeing when people start using things like the AR kits for
yeah,
Apple, and that's becoming more open source. So
exactly.
where do you how does it so we were a data and tech podcast, right? So talk to me about how you see this changing data and tech, and obviously the tech side is easy, but what about data itself?
Yeah, so the key thing here is I think these aren't new topics. Number one,
Hmm.
these aren't sort of new fads. They've been around for quite some time. I think I'd say 2011 was when there was a peak of sort of excitement. We even had 3D televisions that claimed to be able to do some AR capabilities. But
Okay.
where we are now is we're getting to this point of realization where we actually have devices with enough computational power to start to do very basic sort of AR capabilities. And in terms of VR, we're definitely reaching a point of you know where actually the software and the hardware don't quite line up, but the hardware is ready to go. And so when we
Hmm.
talk about data, I think one of the biggest promises for AR and VR is essentially offering analysts or people who work with data of all sorts, whether you're an engineer, a scientist, a chemist, giving them new perspectives on the data that they collect a lot of. So if I take a very simple example of NASA, they use
Yeah.
AR and VR to visualize simulations of data they've collected from past missions, and then they use those simulations to improve the design and build of the next sort of satellites and so on and so forth in the future. If you take something as simple as architecture, for example, an architect might put on a VR headset, look at his
Yeah.
3D model, in fact, maybe walk through the building and look at the architectural data in that way and form. And in terms of you and me, it's actually really powerful when we start to talk about context, because a lot of what data visualization is about
Yeah.
is context. And I think you've done a couple of talks on context actually, which
I have.
I highly encourage people to try and see if you get the chance to see Ravi doing it live. Definitely go and watch. And context is so important, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, but my sort of reservation here is the cost, right? The economies of scale are just not there right now,
Hmm.
especially for VR. So if we take the example of an architect or internal designer, if you've got 2 weeks to turn around a brief and say this is the designs I've got as an internal, say, office plan or a house plan, like you're saying, this is what we're going to build for you.
Yeah.
If you're investing uh, two like 2/3 of your time building a VR application that immerses the end user for that sort of flashy wow factor, and you don't take into account exactly the entire requirements and perfect it, the cost investment, and it's a sunk cost, right? Because if you've created a bespoke environment and you can't use that same one, I mean, maybe you can, you have a sort of suite of templates, but ultimately you're using a lot of resource in order to build that sort of thing out. And right now, the tech is the economies of scale. So the price points aren't there for all of the different sort of prerequisites you need for the software and the hardware. It's just not there to scale at that speed. And that's my reservation is mainly around VR, around that, because it's a very niche sort of product in that sense.
And I'd agree. I think you talk about economies of scale. I think in an enterprise context, it's actually less of a problem, and it's more of an issue around competitive advantage and disadvantage, actually, whether how you sort of implement and use VR in the industries where it actually does offer value. I think I think pretty much every organization that works in a space that handles data that could possibly be benefit from VR or AR has some sort of they always call them labs or innovation hubs inside of their companies that are already playing with these ideas. But I think what they're struggling with is catching these ideas onto something that's viable. And VR definitely has that challenge, apart from maybe VR gaming. And if you take like cinematics, for example, where it's actually quite useful when you're designing a game to be in the game world from a virtual perspective, so you can actually better build the environment. But I don't think we have enough use cases like gaming where that's happening. But when we switch over to AR, I think pretty much everyone who has a smartphone that's been launched in the last 2 to 3 years has been either directly or indirectly been subject to AR in some way or form, even if it's something as simple as taking a photo. When you hold up your phone and you take a photo of something, and your camera or your phone tells you that this is in focus, or this is a face, or that's not a face, that in itself is AR. That's AR in its simplest form, and we've all seen that. And we sort of just take it for granted at how well it works. You kind of just look at your phone and it's highlighting someone's face. And even the Samsung phones can take a photo when they smile. That's a very simple AR capability that we can already achieve today. You're laughing because maybe the feature's not great, right?
Yeah, I've seen it go hit and miss. But again, we'll talk. We can talk phones in another one. I think AR's this wonderful beast. I think, and there's a lot more tangible insights because, first of all, everyone's seen Iron Man and Minority Report, right? So to be able to be like Iron Man, to like have everything around him where he's like flicking the air around and speaking to Jarvis, and that's the sort of levels people aspire to.
That's
that
my worst nightmare, if I'm honest. Like, I can barely keep up with notifications on my phone. Can you imagine if they're on my face all the whole time? Oh my word!
and this is I think you've almost hit the nail on the head there. I think yes, it's going to be fantastic. Like if we talk about applications in terms of you're an engineer in a factory and you need to know, like, have instruction on screen while you're doing something, or like vitals while you're like checking the pressure of something, and you don't want something to blow up on your face, or you need to make sure a certain procedure is encountered and it sort of shows you as you go along. That's fantastic. That's exactly where AI should be used. Now, or like, for example, bringing something to life, like a direction. The classic example is mapping, right? When you're driving along and you've got an AR thing, it's non-intrusive. It's not blocking your line of sight because it's part of your line of sight, and it's telling you and nudging you in a non-intrusive way. Now, the issue then becomes, if we now think of augmented reality utopia, how close is that? Like, how much of a fine line are we treading with a utopia versus a dystopia, where in order to make money off applications that do this sort of give you these sort of features, they will inevitably put adverts on. So imagine saying, I need to figure out how I'm getting to London Bridge from where I am now. You need to watch a 5-second video before you can. It's like, no, just get me from A to B. Just show me that path right now.
I think you make a really good point. It's totally a world that we kind of live in today. If you just simply take your devices you look at today, challenge someone to go half an hour without either accidentally looking at or being subject to some sort of screen or device of some sort. There's just, unless you live like in a zero tech environment, which some people do, and I'd really appreciate people who do that. Even something silly as a smartwatch, it's just another screen. So you have your laptop, you have your iPad, you have your phone, you have your screen. These are all just trying to get the attention of your eyes. And so when you move to something like AR, where this information can be with you more often than something like your phone or your watch, I think attention shifts, right? And so you can do a little bit more and a little bit less. One of the things I like about AR is that there's no point showing you, like, for example, when you go on a website, every single advert on the page has to fight for your attention because it knows that they're competing for your attention. However, AR by virtue of augmenting reality, automatically limits what you can be shown. If I'm looking at a white wall, there's no point showing me the nearest hotel because I'm staring at a white wall. But if I've previously searched for directions to a hotel, then I've already given it something specific to focus on. So it's now going to show me either a path to the hotel and show me where it is. But it's not going to then show me, oh, by the way, did you know that you can get a coffee over there? Because, that's not my incentive. So I think there's an element to which I think the technology can help focus those kind of decisions. And I think advertising today is actually the way it is because a lot of the sort of advertising industry didn't really see Google and the likes of Facebook coming along. Facebook and Google kind of just turned out of nowhere and took people away from print onto screens, and people really struggled to adapt. Apart from obviously people who were buying the ads, but the industries that struggled to who needed that income really struggled to adapt. So they resorted to desperate strategies, which is why you have the adverts that start playing sound in the back of your in the back of your browser, and you don't know where it's coming from. So I think that will happen less because I think the kind of companies developing AR have a more holistic picture. That said, I think we do need a little bit of a, sort of a step back, and we almost need like an ethics committee around this because if I have AR glasses and they're constantly on, I don't know if you remember the guy called Robert Scoble, but he was famous for wearing a Google Glass to his shower. So he had a shower with his Google Glass on. And then he sort of went viral for doing this, and then he kind of went out into the public the next day, and he realized that because people were now aware he was wearing this thing with a camera that was constantly on, they couldn't tell whether he was filming them and so on and so forth. So suddenly this thing flips because for AR to work, it has to be aware of everything around you. But what if you don't want to be part of someone's reality, as it were, augmented reality? Like how do you stay out of that? And I don't think we've actually solved that well enough. Even with things like Facebook and mobile phones, we don't have enough control of that to be able to port that kind of intelligence to AR.
Well, you say that, but there's a couple of stories that have come out about the next iPhone. I don't know if you've heard, but Apple, I think, allegedly took a patent out where at certain concerts, people can be blocked from videoing. So they will say you can't have your camera facing this concert because we don't want you to video it. We want you to enjoy the experience, and if you want to have a live video, you have to purchase. Okay. So I think the technology is probably there in order to stop the privacy. But go on, you've got a point to make.
So I think that's actually ridiculous. Like the fact that I see, I mean, and it's funny because it's Apple as well. So there's two problems here. Number one, Apple devices aren't cheap. So when you pay like nearly $1,000 or £1,000 because it's virtually the same in the UK, you're paying a lot of money for this thing, and you're probably only going to use it for, let's say, a year to 2 years max. And then Apple turns around and tells you, oh, by the way, I know you paid us for this device, but we're going to tell you when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate to take videos and photos. I think that crosses the line. Now, I can hear all the comedians and musicians out there going, whoa, we need to make a living. If people record this stuff on YouTube, it won't be the same. And I was like, well, no, hold on. YouTube is not the same as being at the concert live. And if you actually have an issue with that kind of stuff, it's actually part of a cultural issue that you need to sort out within the venue. If you've heard of Chris Rock, Chris Rock makes people put their phones in a sealable bag before they actually enter the venue. So you can have your phone with you, you just can't take it out of the bag to record the event. So, I just think it's a cultural thing about the way we live our lives now. We live a life where if I buy something and it's mine, I've purchased it, I shouldn't then discover a few months later that I can't take videos at a venue, because that's not in the small print when I buy the device. There's no way on Apple packaging that would ever have the line that says in some concert venues we might block you from filming the event. So I don't know. Those are the kind of issues we need to think about, though. Not just concerts, but people. What if there are people who are vulnerable, who shouldn't be, captured on these kind of systems? You really need a really tight mechanism, a centralized system that can actually control how this is managed.
But then that comes down to what we were talking about with the Facebook, with the Facebook issue earlier, where the literacy just isn't there. Like, think about policymakers right now. That I have this sort of running theory where the people who are in government or in politics right now, they're not the guys who have the expertise. They always rely on external consultancies to inform them, and no doubt these external consultancies will have a lobby point to make, so therefore we'll try and shape policy to help them. So they will always have this vested interest. When we do get to a point where tech and data literacy are the norm, then yeah, we can definitely see changes like this. But that's where I don't think this isn't going to become so part of our lives. Um, if you remember, I think last June, I was asking you about your Apple Watch. You know, like
Hmm.
what does it do? What does it do versus what I had back then, which was a Fitbit? Like
Yeah.
what is it adding to what you're doing? And your answer was more about the notifications and how it just allows you to make a choice. It gives you
Yeah.
another layer of choice of
Hmm.
whether to take your phone out to respond to a notification, or as well as the passive background fitness tracking. And I think that really resonates with me. Like I feel like that decision you can make because you've got a tap instead of a vibration or a sound
Yeah.
happening. Now, with augmented reality, what will happen is you'll just see it coming in all the time. So, for example, I don't know, I could be having someone speaking to me, having a very serious conversation, but I'm wearing a Google Glass
Hmm.
and I've got the football on.
Hmm.
So, am I really paying attention? You know?
So this is an interesting thing because we there's actually a few good devices, and maybe it's just worth touching on these very briefly. They'll all be in the show
Hmm.
notes. So the first thing we ever saw was Google Glass. That was almost too ahead of its time because that kind of technology is kind of just coming now. And if you take one step further back, I don't know if people recall this, the Xbox Connect, that was actually an AR device. It captured you in infrared and then augmented you onto the television, and then the PlayStation had something similar.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
Paranormal Activity actually based one of their films around the Connect
yeah,
because of the
exactly.
dots.
Exactly. And
But yeah.
so those are the big players, and everyone's heard of Oculus and Microsoft VR. Now, there's a whole slew of devices that I don't think anyone even has on their radar that I think you should absolutely look at and research. So I'm just going to go through a couple of them. The first one is by a company called Magic Leap. Now, Magic Leap have actually been able to raise over $1 billion in investment for a product that no one has ever seen, which is kind of interesting because you don't get that kind of money unless you've actually got something compelling. But like most things, that can turn into thin air. So I really hope they have a CEO like Elon Musk that can actually back
Make something into reality. Yeah.
the conversation. But what is compelling about that is the mechanism by which it works is it doesn't augment anything onto glass. It actually augments directly onto your retina. So it takes a different approach where
Oh,
instead of augmenting onto a plane, which is glass in front of your face, it augments into your retina. So there's always perfect clarity of what you're looking at. And by doing that, it's also able to know whether you're paying attention to something or not. And so it's kind of weird, but basically it won't augment anything unless you look at a particular part of the screen. So when you're not looking at a sort of a visual cue on the bottom of the bottom right hand of the screen, there's nothing augmenting. And then as soon as you move your eyes just ever so slightly, it picks up
right.
this movement and then augments the kind of environment. But it's not perfect. You can go on the website and look at how it's supposed to be able to do that.
Sure.
Another one is the actually a product that got canned just yesterday. I can't believe this. I was doing research before today, and I was like, "Wait a minute, this was a product a month ago. Now it's been canned." Intel launched something called a Vaunt, Intel Vaunt, and what's amazing about this is it just looks like a normal pair of glasses, and it again works in a similar way. It doesn't project onto glass; it projects off the glass into your retina, and then the information basically is always perfect. Even if you don't have perfect vision, if you need glasses, this will still be sharp because it's not projecting through the glass. It's sort of augmenting onto your own vision and sort of reading your sort of visual perception. And so it can overlay things like directions and so on and so forth. But it's got a very small sort of pane on which it can augment onto. So unless you
Right.
look into that pane, you'll never ever see anything. And it does it all with very basically the lasers in this thing are less effective than your mobile phone screen, and the amount of radiation that gives your face and eyes, even though that's basically nothing. So that's kind of interesting. And then you've got things like Apple, who are shoving lots of technology into that tiny little slit on the top of your phone. It's now called a
Hmm.
notch. It's got a name. It's a thing. Android phones are copying it. That fits a whole bunch of technology onto the phone, and then that's able to read information about your environment and your face, and then augment you in a different place. Rather than augmenting reality, it's augmenting sort of your reality onto some virtual aspects. It's not VR. It's technically mostly AR. And then you've got things like the Oculus Rift and the Microsoft HoloLens, which people have heard of. So check out
Yeah.
the show notes. Now, what is interesting is I don't think people are aware that the technology is actually moving ahead quite quickly, and it's moving ahead faster than the policy. And this touches on your point about like, I totally agree with you on this. I sometimes hear people talking about policy on these kind of topics, and I was like, you just have no idea. That's where we were 5 years ago.
Hmm.
Like,
Exactly.
and technology companies aren't going to stop because you don't know what's going on, and so
and
my
and and, the, and it will always be with these sorts of companies like AR and VR specialists. It's
yeah
always going to be a small team of 5 to 10 people who are just experts at this, right? It's not going to be the big players. The big players will just buy these smaller companies out,
yeah
get them in, and then learn from them and give them more money and
you
funding.
buy in the capability and you expand. It's kind of there's no such thing as a startup kind of coming in and knocking Facebook, Google, or Apple off the top now. That you kind of go for acqui-hires now.
Yeah. No, I mean, my sort of key point around all of these things. So you've mentioned again like the fact that all of these companies, like Vaughan, for example, and all the companies you mentioned that we might not have heard of. The issue there is that the benefit that Google, Apple, Facebook have is they have their own platform and ecosystem.
Yep.
Google and Apple to the high nth degree, like they've got an entire platform ready to go,
Yeah.
and they can just slide another product into their ecosystem, and people just pick it up because it just fits their lifestyle.
Yep. Yep.
And that's the USP.
I think that's
Now,
actually a problem.
okay,
I think that's actually a big problem because what that means is
you're
the
hamstrung and you have to stay with the device. For example,
consumers
I've
have no
got
choice. Yeah.
So with the Apple Watch, I can't
You
now
can't
then
connect
change
that
my
to anything
phone.
else. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're locked. And Apple love it. Not only do they sell you an expensive phone, they manage to upsell you an expensive watch. And now, because you've upsold an expensive watch, you'll never leave the phone platform, which means you'll probably go and buy Apple Music, which means you'll also buy Apple Photos and iCloud because you run out of space to keep all your music. And therefore, again, you're locked. And so when it comes to switching your phone, you look at the choices and you go, am I gonna am I gonna burn my watch, my phone, my music subscription, and all my photos on iCloud just
yeah,
because I want a new phone? No. And then this is where you end up with things like the iPhone having really crap notification systems, but no one complains because guess what? You can't complain.
you can't complain.
It really drives me up the wall sometimes, but I think this is actually the fundamental problem. The fact that small
Mhm.
players can no longer get to the kind of size that Google, Facebook, and Apple have done without at least taking either part investment from these companies or being acquired by these companies. And the problem with part investment is that that investment always drives the agenda, and that agenda always serves the parent company. So
Absolutely.
governments need to really start, really helping small companies burst through. And unfortunately, I've got to be in my bonnet about this. This is exactly why GDPR is not going to help anything, because guess what? The companies that have the muscle, the finances, the legal structure to actually handle things like GDPR, guess what? Tend to be the Facebooks, the Googles, and the Apples. If you're a startup and you're
So
looking at, setting up, you like GDPR is just going to be one additional thing that you won't know how to navigate. So you'll just try and avoid it, and you just maybe won't do it. And to be honest, if it's a big enough hurdle, you won't bother starting a startup. And the same
yeah,
companies that are manipulating everything will keep on doing that.
and GDPR is interesting you mentioned, because yesterday I was reading an article about, even amongst this entire storm about their privacy and how Facebook's handling information, what's now come out is that they've found a loophole. Of course they have,
Yep.
where they can get around GDPR, and they move everything to Ireland or something like that, and all they'd have to pay is $5 million if they get caught or do something different. And for that fraction of a cost, because again, it's like 20 billion or 5% of your revenue, whichever's higher.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I'm beginning to see, it is going to be, as you say, the bigger boys will find these loopholes and these caveats and things, whereas it's the smaller, medium-sized companies that are going to get
Yeah. Yeah.
bitten.
Just take something as simple as cookies. This EU cookie policy that says at the top of your website, you have to have this thing that says you're not tracking cookies, okay?
Hmm.
Now, ask yourself, when was the last time you went to a personal blog that had that thing on the top of the thing, on the top of the page? Like, never. And yet, this is the law that every website in the EU has to have this stuff. And yet, every
Hmm.
website uses cookies, and yet you don't see it everywhere. Only
No.
the large companies with resources who actually have the ability to do this can do it, which is why this policy is so ineffective. Because to dismantle these companies from the top, to actually disrupt what they do, you have to have room for startups and companies who do want to do the right thing to pop up and give consumers the choice to be able to
Yeah.
choose between Facebook and another social media platform. I can't choose. I can't choose at the moment. Like this podcast turned into a Facebook hating podcast, but
I mean, the real winner of social media, let's be honest, is MySpace. Like Tom sold at the height, and he is sitting pretty in his yacht right now.
Everyone was Tom's friend, remember? Like
exactly, and everyone still is Tom's friend. So yeah, he's the real winner here. He's the real winner of all this. Now I'm going to bring it back. To augmented and VR. Yeah. As you can tell, we're very much into the so what section of the pod. Now. I'm going to make my final point on this is going to be around data viz, because we're both data viz practitioners.
Why not? Let's do this.
And I just don't see it happening. I just don't. Fundamentals, apart from maybe when we get to the wearable section where everything's augmented around your sensors, and you look at a screen and it tells you, "Hey Ravi, here's your report for this week for this particular screen," and then you can interact with it. Now, what I don't see is VR or AR being the norm in data viz. Like, yeah, it'd be really cool to see a bar chart pop out of nowhere.
Okay. So,
but it's going to end up being a 3D bar chart.
So Ravi, I'm gonna. I share this very view, and I think you've been a victim. You're a victim of something I personally hate, and I hate it with a passion. And that is, as soon as any kind of technology comes along, there's always someone who thinks, yes, now is the time for this kind of application to go mainstream. And they build very mediocre, very substandard apps or examples of how this thing should work. We all look at it and we go, oh, this technology is a fad. This is never going to work. And so you dismiss...
an Arcos tablet, for example.
Yes. And so you dismiss the whole thing without ever looking at it again, when actually all that was wrong here is that you were victimized. You were basically a victim of a really poor example of that technology working, okay? And so I think this is what's actually happening right now. If you go on the App Store, I can't tell you how many apps can now suddenly augment pie charts in 3D space. And I'm like, oh, my worst nightmare. Like, you took a 2D thing. You took something that was designed for print and flat format screen, and then you just decided to basically extrude it by a few millimeters and call it, here's a 3D pie chart. As if rotating it in three-dimensional space gives you any additional perspective of anything.
But applications for business for AR, if it's focusing on data viz, no. Like apart from personalization, I don't see it.
Let me get there.
Okay.
Just let me get there. Okay. So I'm going to paint a utopian vision here. I just want you to just bear with me. Okay. I'm going to take very specific examples that are easy to understand and sort of visualize. I'm going to take manufacturing and retail. Okay. You walk into a store as a consumer. I'm not going to go at this from a consumer perspective because we're looking at the business. So I work at H&M Oxford Street, okay? I'm the store manager. I want to know how are my products on a particular display doing, okay? And this is funny because this kind of information takes roughly 2 to 3 days to turn around in a typical retail outlet, because you have to wait for the sales to come through. You then have to clock where those items were actually placed in the store. And then you have to make a value judgment about whether the positioning of the item in the store was actually benefiting the product or not, okay? And if I take retail as an example, imagine augmented reality, where as a manager, I can go up to a particular display, let's say a shoe display, and there's 5 shoes on the rack on the wall, okay? And I can look at this thing and I can say to something, show me the performance of these shoes. And because it's looking at these shoes, it's able to tell me, it just turns out that since when I moved this shoe from this shelf to this top shelf, it started performing better. Why is that? Because that is at eye level, okay? So, and it won't say that that's at eye level, and that's why. The manager will be able to deduce and use sort of common sense and knowledge here. And this is what happens at Tesco, for example. You walk around, and the stuff at eyeline is the stuff that sells the best. That's why it's positioned. That's why companies pay for that. That's one use case. Take another use case, manufacturing. A manufacturing line, really, really busy. They optimize manufacturing lines to make sure things are performing well and there's no bottlenecks. Now, the issue here is you normally, again, have to wait for turnaround time between seeing the metrics on a screen, which isn't the context, understanding, okay, there's a bottleneck developing here, then you have to go to that section of the manufacturing line, look at it and see what is actually happening here that's causing this problem. And then you realize, it's because the person who's working on that section is new. So, they will be a little bit slow, and that's fine, okay? What if you could, again, augment that part of the manufacturing line? So simply by just, scanning, going maybe to a particular section of the manufacturing line, there'd be a place where you could look at a visualization, augmented, and it would say to you, okay, this is who's working here today. They've been doing this for 3 days and not 3 years like the previous person, and that's probably why productivity is down today. And you can see a trend of how this is going throughout the day, and so you can talk to that person, you can work with them. Those I think are actually use cases that would work.
So you're basically talking about interacting with your data, like having that interaction rather than a transaction. Okay, I can see that.
but
I can
it's
see that.
augmented. It's augmented in context, so you don't have to. It's taking
It's the
away.
contextual point,
Yes,
exactly. Yeah.
exactly. The context. You are looking at it in context. Take a sports example as a consumer. You go to watch a football match. I
Yeah.
actually think AR could help there because imagine everyone sitting watching a football match and the kind of stuff you see on TV. When you're
Hmm.
actually at a football match, AR could actually help with those kind of things like statistics and who's running, who's performing. And maybe it's a premium feature that some people have access to. And maybe for those who aren't so bothered and don't care, you just don't have the glasses in, so it doesn't work. So I just
Yeah.
think the examples we have of
Coaches.
AR today just don't work. But when everything works and the context is, you're looking at the information literally right next to the context where it applies, I think it's priceless. And that is where it will make a difference.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think I'd agree because there's so much you can do within a day to day thing where it just helps uh, tick along. Like everyone's talking about, the easiest one is of course training and simulating, but my favorite would be translations, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
Imagine like setting in like recently I was in a business meeting, but the entire meeting was in France apart from the section where I was coming in and talking about some examples.
In English.
Everything was in French. So I'd come in and talk in English for about 20 minutes, and then everyone switched back to French. Now,
Bonjour, je
my
m'appelle Ravi.
yeah, exactly, like comme ci comme ça. That's as far as I get. Um, but if imagine having subtitles live, like just for you to interpret that language, or if you're like think about sign language, for example.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking to a deaf person, for the accessibility of saying I want to say this, and then it will sign in front of you, and then you just make the same signs.
Yeah.
Or again, if for a person who's deaf, they can see what someone's trying to say.
Exactly.
Um,
And the key thing here is the friction shouldn't be any more than what you already do today. I shouldn't have to, even if this kind of sounds silly, but the perfect vision is when you don't have glasses, you just have these sort of contact lenses, yeah, where you don't even have to put them on to get this benefit. This is when context and ease of use are realized, right? Because if I have to, like, it's the same thing with your phone, right? To take a photo, you have to pick up your phone. But your
it's
phone
got
is
to be
much
charged
easier to
first.
pick up. Yeah, it's got to be charged. But your phone is much easier to pick up than an SLR, which is why phones have become the most common mode of photography. But imagine if you didn't even have to pick up your phone to take a camera, to take a photo, right? That is the next sort of level of ease. But it's going to take years to get there, probably tens of years. But that is a level of sort of context and ease of use you need for this stuff to be useful. And therefore, that's why I hate it when I see an app going into AR on your phone and then extruding a pie chart or a bar chart into 3D and saying, here's some value. I took this two-dimensional thing and I forced it into a three-dimensional world just so you could look at it,
Hmm.
There's one app where you can take an Excel spreadsheet and then it visualizes like a scatter plot in 3D space. And I was
Wow,
just like, well, no, like a lot of people really like it. And, it's a paid app.
it's
And
the
I'm
gimmick.
like,
It's the gimmick.
honestly, this is so bad. Like you've just lost the point of a scatter plot. Number one, you're not supposed to be able to navigate it in 3D space. It's supposed to be a two-dimensional thing
They're not stars, right?
with
They're
an
not
X and Y.
stars.
Yeah, exactly. There's no Z-axis on a scatter plot,
Yeah.
for goodness sake. So, yeah.
Well,
So,
that's sort of covered off the now what, Tim. Honestly, like that's
yeah,
we've gone into
yeah,
the future of it and where we see it going. And I think we've both agreed that AR has a lot more sort of day to day potential, whereas VR has its own niche. Particularly, like I saw a cool training app. I was scrolling my LinkedIn feed today. Of a ski training basically. It's a couple of things on wheels, so it's similar to you being on skis,
Mhm.
but you're not slow going down anything. But instead, you've got a VR headset on, which shows you as if you're going down slopes, but all you're doing is moving your body.
Yeah,
And the machine then simulates the same G forces you get when you're going down a ski slope. It's that sort of thing that VR touches on, rather than these sort of day to day things. And again, like you mentioned, the gimmicks. So
so it even goes one step better. I've seen VR. What do you call it? Wind. Those machines that skydivers go into.
wind tunnel.
You can actually get VR wind tunnels for skydivers, and because you're actually skydiving, you can put a gyroscope basically on your backpack. You can
Hmm.
actually, in a virtual way, have like a never-ending skydive, because because you're virtualizing the whole thing. And also, you've got cameras now which are able to capture 360 environments. You can
Yes.
recreate the sort of same perspective multiple times and actually learn and develop your skills before you then go and do the real thing. So you do like one jump, then you're able to relive it multiple times because you've got VR headsets and AR headsets that allow you to
Yeah.
see the jump from different perspectives, and then you can go off and do the real thing. And I totally agree with you. I think VR will have applications, but it's still going to be quite a niche aspect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
I think that's
There we
episode
go.
number 4. That was a really long Facebook ranty podcast.
Yeah, there's a lot of Facebook rants in there. There's a couple of touch points on policymakers again. But yeah, I think we can clock this as another bumper podcast as an apology to our listeners.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you've got feedback about the show, as always, you can reach us on Twitter. It's 3wattspod. That's also our website, 3wattspod.com. If you're looking up for us on podcast apps, you can now find us on pretty much all podcast clients. Most podcast apps just use the Apple one, so you can find us on there. Our website also lets you listen to the latest episode of the podcast. Ravi, did you know that?
I did. I've been poking around it the last couple of days, and I've advertised it. I'm like, hey, look, we can listen to it right here.
Exactly. So yeah, you can now listen to our latest episode available online and listen to the podcast in the relevant pages. If you want to find our show notes, just go to 3wattspod.com/E4. That's episode 4, and you'll be able to find the show notes that we've referenced today. Okay, Ravi, when will we do our next podcast?
Let's put it in the calendar this time and actually lock it down.
Yeah, like next week.
Yeah, sometime next week. Happy with that.
Absolutely, good stuff. All right, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you soon.